Is streaming now. As per usual, we are going to start at Berkeley time, which is 7:10. So we're going to just make sure right now that everything is working, and then we'll get started at 7:10. Hello, everyone. Could I please get your attention? We're going to go ahead and get started. All right. Hello, everyone. Can everyone in the classroom see the screen okay? Okay, awesome. Sounds good. We're going to go ahead and get started. Hello to those that are on stream. Elizabeth, let me know if the audio is working okay. Yeah? Okay, awesome. Well, welcome to week 3, components and composition. So this is a really exciting week. Components are probably one of the most interesting and most important parts of Figma. And also Elizabeth actually wrote this lesson and this week's lab and homework. So, yeah, okay. Okay, so today we're going to talk about components first, kind of how to use them, what they are, how you're going to navigate them in your files. We're going to talk about a few other really important and useful tools, primarily that are going to help you with just navigating your files really easily. We're going to talk also about grids and guides as well as constraints. So these are kind of 3 different small tools that are really powerful in terms of making sure that your compositions are all exactly the way that you want them to be. And then we'll dive into the theory of compositions and spacing and ways to understand how to do both of those in a really effective way. And finally, we'll talk about ideation and wireframing. So if you're an enrolled student, you can go ahead and open up the attendance form. The link is yelkey.com/full. Again, this is a link that expires around like midnight tonight, so it's only going to work if you're watching this live, and then we'll send out the permanent link in Slack later on. Again, that's yelkey.com/full. Let me know If it's not showing you what you think it should be showing you, and we'll make sure that's set up. Awesome. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. As a heads up, there is a demo that we'll be going through if there is time that you can do on your own kind of file going on, or ideally, if you can make a duplicate of this from the community page, you'll be able to access all of the icons that Elizabeth has already made to do the demo that we're going to be talking about. Yeah, well, that will get started on components. So in a sense, components are a reusable kind of element that you can use throughout your design. They're a really important part of design systems, which are something that I'll talk about a little bit later as well. So again, these are reusable kind of building blocks. You can think of them as pieces that you have pre-made, that you've already prefabricated, that you can use later on however you best see fit. You can make a component out of anything in your project, whether it's shapes, icons, images, text, a combination of any of those things, a frame even, anything can be a component. They're good for grouping things together into categories as well and maintaining consistent designs across your project. Throughout the course of using Figma, you're going to see this special diamond icon. Anytime you see this 4 diamond, it means components. And also when you see a standard diamond, it's going to also signify components. There are 2 different kinds of symbols that we're going to talk about because there are 2 particular types of components. So really quick, we can see some things that would be a really good use of components are, for example, buttons, toggles, checkboxes, all these different things that you see pieces of when you're using an app, when you're using your phone. You could think of maybe all of these icons in the top with the close, the full screen, the minimize, those could be components. These tabs, though they have different content in them, they're both the same kind of object, but we want to treat them as something that's reusable, so they could also be components. So again, we talked about briefly those kind of 2 types of components. So how do these components actually work? The first is with the main component. The main component you can think of as the parent. It is the source of truth for other components. So the main defines the properties. It can include things like shape, size, color, the location of the text boxes, all of that good stuff. Anything that you would need to be consistent across different things is defined or kind of dictated by that main component. To make a main component, you would want to click the component button that shows up in the very top of the toolbar, or you can use Alt Control K or Option Command K. So I'll show you really quickly where that is. Normally this top bar is going to say, the project that it's in and then the file name. When you have anything selected, you're actually going to see this button appear that has components. So it's that special diamond. Again, there's 2 kinds of diamonds you're going to see. One is the main component diamond, which is the set of 4 diamonds. The other diamond you'll see is the instance diamond. That's just one single diamond. And an instance is kind of like a copy of the main component that you can reuse throughout your design. All of those instances are linked to the main component, so any change that you make in the main will be reflected in the instances. That said, you can also override them because sometimes you want them to be mostly the same with a little bit of difference. For example, I have a main component that is a button. It's a button with placeholder text, so it just says the word button. But if I want to have a button that says continue later in my app, I can have an instance of it and then change the text to say continue. We'll be doing a demo of this, so it all makes a little bit more sense. But just remember the words main and instance and think about how those 2 work together and how they're related to each other. If we say that the main is the parent, you can think of the instance as the child. Now, all of the components that live in your file are going to be in the Assets panel. We talked before about how there is a Layers panel, and there's a second tab on it that says Assets. That's where you're going to see all of the components you have. So that's going to be split into local components, meaning components that were made in this file. They're local to this particular file. You have used in this file, which is anything that you use throughout the file, and then you have any kind of additional libraries you had. So in this case, we are using an actual set of components to have all of the slides. We have a slide deck template file where all of the basic slides were templated, and we reuse them anytime we want to make a new deck. So in this case, I can access the library of slide deck templates. Any kind of set of components that are published and used together are treated like a library. They're called a library. There's also a handy shortcut that Figma recently released that's going to be really helpful and that I think they're going to be working on a lot, which is the Shift-I shortcut. You can access basically any of those components really quickly by using the keyboard shortcut Shift-I instead of clicking on the Assets panel. So like we talked about, if I just go to the Assets panel for this file, I'm going to see a couple of different components that we have going on in the demo space. So these are kind of example components that we're going to be making later. And then I also have the lecture slides components and the thumbnails components. So I have all of these slide deck templates going on. If I wanted to drag one out and use it, I could actually just pull it out into the page, and it's going to paste an instance of that component in here for me. But if I wanted to do this a little bit easier, I could do Shift-I. Now with Shift-I, it's going to actually pull up recently used, and then I can use all of the slide deck templates slides that I have going on here. So that Shift-I, again, is a shortcut you're going to be using anytime you want to access existing components. So there's kind of two ways that you can treat components, or two ways that you can think about how you want to start making your components. The first is that you create a main component, and you use those different sets of main components throughout your entire design. So we have this example here where there's one progress bar that has two versions, or normally you would have four versions. Each of these versions are its own main component that I can then reuse on different pages in this particular app. So if I have a lot of pages that need to use this progress bar, I would have these four versions of the same progress bar that I reuse later on. Now this is really helpful because if I wanted to change, like let's say how far this division is, if say it wasn't exactly 25% and you need to pull it just a little bit further, I can change just this one, and all of the ones that I use later in the app are going to also change. Whereas if I were to do the second process, you have to do things a little bit differently. So an example of where you might use this is if you have a set kind of button that you use a lot, like a continue button that you want to use all the time, or a next button or a back button that you're going to use all the time, you might want to have a special version of it that says next or that says continue. Another one would be icons, where you definitely want to have an icon library. You know, I need like an X, I need a magnifying glass, I need a cursor. They're all going to be the same shape. We want them all to be the same size, but they all have a different drawing in them. So you want all of those drawings to be their own main component they can pull out and use later really easily. Now the second way to use components is to have them all as a little bit pulled back of a template with kind of filler information that you then want to basically override with your own information. So a good example of a situation where you want to have a main with template information, with filler information, is something like a card. So here I have all of these organization cards, or all these event cards that have, you know, the main component might have a filler date. It might say October 10th as just a date that I picked randomly. And then the filler text here says very, very long organization name that spans 2 lines. The reality is that when I actually use this in my designs, I'm going to change that name to be, you know, whatever it is going to be. It's going to be Girls Who Code. It's going to be Emerald Isle Immigration Center of New York, Center for Reproductive Rights. All of them are going to be different. So it doesn't make sense for me to make like 30 main components when I need to have so many of them look different. So in this case, again, I'd have one main component with filler text and all of these instances that have different unique information. So a couple of examples of different kinds of components or places that you might use components that are both more normal and a little bit more out there are, we talked about buttons a lot of the time. Buttons are kind of the easiest way to think about reusable content that's going to say different things. So buttons are going to be a really key example of components that we talk about. But if you want to go off the rails a little bit, a really interesting use of components on Figma Community is in this Catan board game. So if you've ever played Settlers of Catan, you know that it has all of these pieces. It has these hexagon tiles that make up the map, and they're going to be reusing a lot of them all the time. Everybody, like in Monopoly or anything, gets a set of these pieces, and there's a lot of them. So you're going to have to be dealing with a lot of different items on your file. And if you decide that, like, hey, I don't like the drop shadow on this anymore, you don't want to go into all 3,000 items that you have on your file and individually change the drop shadows on all of them. You want to be able to just fix it in one component and have all of them change. So in this case, we have all of these different main components that are the white pieces, the red pieces, the orange pieces, and the blue pieces. And this person who made this file actually further abstracted them into a default gray piece where the drop shadow lives and the shape lives. So most likely, this is the primary, like the most important main component, and these are also further variants of the main. We're going to talk about variants soon as well. But another example that you can think of for main components or for components in general is like an avatar maker. So if you've ever used like the Nintendo Wii and you made a Mii of yourself, you can think of all those different pieces of the face, all of those different hairstyles as components that you can kind of switch out and interchange. They're all pieces of a larger part. Now, variance is a word that I just mentioned, and this is actually super exciting because this came out pretty recently and has really changed the way that people interact with components and basically made it like 2,000 times easier. So variants are a way of grouping components that have similar purposes, but they're minorly different. So they're variations of each other. They're all kind of the same idea, but they need to be a little bit different to be used in different cases. So when you think of something like UI design, you might have a single button that has a lot of different states. So even if I just have this one label, I know that I'm going to have it look like one thing when I hover on it, another thing when I focus on it, another thing when it's disabled and I can't press the button. I don't really want all four of those to live very far apart from each other. So by making them a variant of each other, I can have it live in one place. They're all associated with each other. And then when I use it later, I can swap them out really quickly. So by having these variants, you're able to organize your components really cleanly, which is critical, especially when you're not working alone. If I'm working with Elizabeth on a file, and she's made 16 kinds of buttons like you see here, but they're all put in different spaces, they're all kind of used wherever she feels like putting them, it's not going to be helpful. But if she makes them all variants, I can really quickly swap them, interact with them however I need, and I know exactly where all of them originate. So to create a group of variants, there's a couple different things that you can do. The standard way is to just make one main component and then a little button will pop up. We'll demo this so it all makes a little bit more sense. And that'll make a copy of your main component as a second version, and then you can edit it however you want. But also, this slide was more for people who have already learned how to use Figma without variants. If you just use the naming scheme, it's going to automatically combine them really easily for you. So this is a really nice quality of life improvement they made. So if I named all of these like button/default, button/hover, button/focus, button/disabled, and then I made them all components and combined them as variants, which is going to show up in your menu. If you use that good naming scheme, Figma will automatically say, oh, that's exactly what they wanted. I'm just going to call them all button, and they're all going to be variants of button. So to adjust and swap those variants, you're going to be able to access this part of the toolbar. Again, this will make a lot more sense when we actually jump into it. But you can basically have different names for the different properties you're changing out. So for example, here, you might have this property named state. So is the state in default? Is the state in hover? Is the state in focus? What is the current state of it? And then if we go back again, you can have the type of button. So it's not the state, it's just the whole type of button where we have primary with icon, secondary with icon. Again, because these are all buttons, I want them all to live next to each other. So even though there's 4 kinds of buttons and each of them have 4 different states, I can swap them out really easily using this variants menu. So like we talked about earlier, you can use that assets panel to drag out an instance of any kind of variant and drag out an instance of any kind of component, or you can use that Shift-I shortcut we talked about earlier. So with that, I'm going to go ahead into this demo. If you want to download the file or haven't already, I would recommend that you open it up and go to the second page called Demo Space. It's going to have all the icons here that you can use. If you don't want to download it, that's totally fine. You can use a blank file. It's going to be up at our Figma community page. So if you just go to figma.com/@Figma Decal, it should be one of the first things you see, Lecture 3, and you can go ahead and download that. I'll give you just a minute if anybody needs to download it, and then we'll get started. Before that, any questions about anything we talked about? They were main components and instance. So main is the parent, instance is the child. Main is the blueprint, instance is like what you make from the blueprint. Yeah, so a variant you can think of as a way to group main components. Yeah, so it's just like a way to make them all live together. It's something that Figma added several years after they introduced components because they realized oh, people are making a lot of components that are mostly the same, and it makes a lot of sense to have them live next to each other. Yeah, totally. All right, we'll go ahead and go into this demo then. So if we go here, it starts with components. So number 1, we want to create this card and then make it into a component. I can use the icons from below, and then I want to name it card/cloudy. That naming scheme again is going to be really important. So let's go ahead and make our best imitation of this card. I'm just going to go ahead and drag out a rectangle. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going to round the corners by using the border radius right here. And then I'm going to color drop this gray by using eye. So clicking eye, I want the eyedropper tool, and I've made it this gray. it looks like it's a little bit narrower, so I'll go ahead and do that. For the text, I'll write Berkeley CA. And my font, I'm going to pick Work Sans. And I'm going to go ahead and pop that right here. It looks like hers is a little bit smaller, so we'll make it size 10. And then I'm going to go ahead and make another piece of text and make it say the degrees, so 56. I want that to be much bigger, so I'm going to go ahead and change that size to 36 and adjust as I feel fit. So this looks like a little bit too big. I think it's going to be 32. That looks about good to me. So now I've got those first three pieces of the card. We have the background, the text, and the temperature. There's a piece of text that says cloudy, and it's just a little bit smaller. And for that, I'm going to make another copy and have it say cloudy. And I'm also going to do one more thing besides that. I'm going to go ahead and make it right aligned. So by making it right aligned, if I want to have it say like raining or something different later, the spacing is still going to look the same. It's going to look the way I want it to look. So we'll just approximate it to be just right around there. And then I'm going to grab one of the icons. So the icon that chooses here is the cloud. Those live all the way down here. I'm going to select that and make a copy. And then I'm going to paste it right here. So fun thing that Figma just came out with today, there's a big update for copy paste. This is maybe a little bit nerdy of an update, but it makes a lot of stuff really easy. So what I can actually do is right click and say paste here. It's going to paste exactly where I want it to be. So that's been super helpful. Definitely check that out. It's going to make a lot of things in your workflow just generally easier. So now I have this card. I have all these different pieces of it. So you can see if I select all of them, it's actually a rectangle, 3 pieces of text, and an icon. I'm going to actually make this into a single component. By clicking here, it's Control-Alt-K or Command-Option-K. I'm just going to go ahead and click it. And see what it does is it actually combines into a single component that's called Component 5. So you're going to see that it turns into this purple icon with a special diamond. And inside of Component 5, there's 5 different things in it. It just happened to be named Component 5. I'm going to go ahead and right-click it so I can change the name to be card/cloudy. Okay, that's not showing up. I'm going to do Control-R, card/cloudy. Does anybody need help at this point with getting into this to work? Our TAs are happy to walk around and observe. Thumbs up if you've got it. Okay, sounds good. And if anybody needs help, just feel free to raise your hand. Our TAs are more than excited to help. And now we have, again, one component that's named card/cloudy. What we're going to do now is duplicate it to make an instance of it. So watch very carefully these icons going on here. I'm going to hold Alt and drag it out. And now I have a second version of it that is exactly the same, but the icon is this empty single diamond. That empty single diamond means it's an instance. It means that it's not the parent. It's going to inherit any changes from before. So just to prove that point, we're going to go ahead and make some changes of the duplicated instance to show you how it's going to react. So if I'm in this parent instance, I can change the text to say 99 degrees. It's going to change also in the instance. So when I change something in the main, it changes in the instance. Sorry if I'm mixing my words up. If I change something else in the main, like this other piece of text, it's going to change also in the instance. And if I change, like, say, the color of this, it'll also change. So basically, you get the gist. Everything that you do to the main is going to happen to the instance. But if I wanted to override something in the instance, say I don't actually want the temperature for Berkeley, California, I want it for Oakland, it's no longer going to be affected by the main. So now that this one is identical except for the location, when I change this, it's not going to affect the instance anymore because Figma is smart and it knows, like, hey, you clearly didn't want them to say the same thing, so it's not going to be affected anymore. But if I change anything else that I didn't affect, it is still going to do what I want it to do. So that is an easy way to basically change, like, the city that I want here. Now what I'm going to do is actually show you how to swap different instances. So here I'm going to detach the instance of the duplicated component and then edit it to say something else and remake it. So we're going to show you, I think, actually a couple of different ways that you can make variants. This is going to be the old, slightly hacky way to make components, or to make variants, but then I'll show you a different way that you can do it as well. So I'm going to delete this one. And because this one said card/cloudy, I now want to make a card/sunny variant of it. So what I'm going to do is drag it out. I'm going to detach it. So I'm going to right click and say detach instance right here. And you'll notice that in the sidebar, it changed from being purple and having the diamond to just being a regular frame. So when you make a component, it's actually always going to tuck it all into a frame just because that's the easiest way to group everything. When you detach it, it'll revert back into being a frame. So now that it's detached, any changes that I make in the main are not going to affect the detached instance. It's now just a standard frame, doesn't care, doesn't have any rules, nobody's watching over it. Now that I have this one, I'm going to go ahead and change it to be sunny. So I'm going to have it say sunny. I'm going to change the icon by deleting it. I'm going to paste the sun in there. And now it'll be a sunny icon. And then I'm going to rename it to be card/sunny. And it makes sense for this to be 99 degrees. I'm going to go ahead and go back here. Cloudy should be like 56 degrees. Let's make that the standard. So now I've got this one. What I'm going to do is click on it and make it a component. And now I've got two different components. One's called card/cloudy and one is card/sunny. So with that, I can basically make these into variants. So what I'm going to do is select both of them. And all of a sudden, this pops up in the sidebar. So originally that wasn't there. It's not selected when you have just one clicked on. But if I click on both of them, it's going to say combine as variants. And I'm going to do it. And you can watch what happens with the naming. It's laggy. Okay, so now I have the card set of variants. These are both called card, but within card, I've got sunny and I've got cloudy. And you'll notice that these have another different icon. It's the filled in diamond. That filled in diamond means that it is a variant, but still a main component. So now I've got these two, and I can actually make a third one. I can make rainy in a different way. So if I want to have a set of variants going on and I want to add one, all you have to do is click on the name, and this purple icon is going to show up. Click that purple plus sign. It's going to actually make a copy of the top one for you. So it's going to make that copy immediately. It's identical. Everything in it is exactly the same. And it's called variant 3 because obviously they haven't read my mind. I can see that this text is selected, so I'm actually going to go ahead and make it say rainy. And now I'm going to start working on this one. So if it's rainy, let's say it's going to be 45 degrees. The text is going to say rainy. And then the icon is also going to be rain. So I've got these nice raindrops I can use on the cloud. And there we go. You bump the cloud up just a little bit. And now I've got 3 variants of the same kind of component, the same master component card. So let's say that I'm putting these in like a weather diagram for how the weather was in different parts of the world every day for a week. I can use all these components really easily, so I don't have to keep changing the name, keep changing the icon, things that are a little bit more annoying to drag in and out. Now, obviously, these are kind of placeholder temperatures. It would not really make sense for me to make a different component of every possible temperature. So that's a place where I might say, oh, I'll just go ahead and override the changes whenever I need them. So let's go ahead and take a look at this again. You see that it says variants in the sidebar here. Property 1, let's actually change that to say weather. So we've got cloudy, sunny, and rainy for the weathers. And I'm going to actually show you how you can have multiple properties on a single kind of variant set. So we saw earlier that they had those buttons that had different states and different types. So it's this grid that has 2 different axes. We can do that. You can have as many as you want. You could have one thing have like 17 different kinds of properties. Obviously, you probably can't make a 17-dimensional diagram to show all of them really nicely, but it's definitely something you can do. So in this case, I actually want a variant of each of these that says, let's say Clarksville, Maryland, where I'm from. So I'm going to go ahead and add another variant. And cool. So what I'm going to do is I want the weather for this one to still say cloudy, but I'm going to add another property. So I'm going to click here, another variant. I'm going to say add new property. The property is now going to be the city. So the city is default for all 3 of these. I don't want them to say default. I want them to say Berkeley. So I'm going to go ahead and make it say Berkeley. Now all of them are Berkeley, and this one is stuck on default. I'm going to say Clarksville. And I'm just going to pull this up here so it's easier to see. Oh, okay. Okay, hold on. I'm going to pull this this whole frame to be a little bit bigger. And I pull this up here to make it easier to kind of see the association we have going on. So you can probably guess what I'm about to do this one. It's still going to say 56. It's still going to say cloudy. It's still going to have the cloud. It's going to say Clarksville, MD. I'm going to spell it right because I'm from there. So with that, I have this variant, and I can go ahead and drag it out. Or actually, what I'm going to do, oh geez, I'm going to click the plus sign again. So when I click on this, I click the plus sign. It's going to put it there for some reason. And then I'm going to change it to be not cloudy Berkeley, but instead it's going to be sunny Clarksville. And I have to make those edits as well. So I'm not going to walk through all of that just to save time, but one other thing that I want you to notice is that in the sidebar, they all have these common names now. So all of them are going to be card sunny Clarksville, card cloudy Clarksville, card rainy Berkeley, card sunny Berkeley, card cloudy Berkeley. These are all different variants of the same card. So I can use them differently. I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So I'm going to make this, let's actually do it from the menu. So Shift I. I'm going to go from recently used to local components, click on demo space, and click on card. So now I have one card, one of our unique cards. It was called card because, again, the whole variant space is called card. And now that I have this instance, again, the empty diamond means it's an instance, I can change them really quickly. So weather sunny, bam, there you go. Weather rainy, bam, there you go. This is like, I'm probably making a big deal. It doesn't seem that cool. This is so useful. It means that if you had all these cards going on, you didn't have to delete all of them, go to another part of your file, copy paste them all. You can just use this really easy drop down here. I can go ahead and make the city Clarksville. You can make the weather cloudy again. And I don't have to leave the instance that I'm on. I can just do it from right there. This is honestly a really exciting thing. And I hope that you kind of feel this excitement when you're actually using it on your own and in the lab this week. But this is, again, such a helpful tool to have. So just to make another point, I'm going to go ahead and change the weather or the temperature to be what I want it to be. It's going to be 107 degrees. Now, if I'm remembering this correctly, no matter what variant it becomes, the temperature, oh, just kidding, the temperature does get overridden. So that might change depending on the different properties that you have going on, but in certain cases you do want to override some of the information that you have going on here. Yeah, without any questions about these components or these variants so far? Yep. You have to click on the combine as variants button. So if I did go ahead and I made another thing and I called it card, it would be really bad practice, but it wouldn't necessarily break it. So because this lives outside of this, they're not associated with each other. Even if I called this card / hailing, because they exist outside of the variant, it's not going to get confused. It's going to know that they're separate things. It's just not a great naming practice. The reason why it had that automatic naming detection thing was because before variants were introduced, designers were using the slashes to say this is the same thing, but it's a different version of it. So Figma decided to adopt that practice to make it easier to kind of work backwards. Yep. Oh, this whole section? You can treat it like a frame. You can go ahead and just resize it however you want. Yeah, that's basically it. It's not the most reactive thing, so I think they're still working on that there. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, awesome. So we talked there about creating variants, and now we know how to make a main component, how to copy it and make an instance of it, and then also how to make a variant of it. So we'll go ahead back into the slides. Okay, so that's going to be all for components for right now. You're going to get plenty of practice in it when you do the lab this week and the homework this week. It's going to really get driven into your head over the course of the next couple of weeks in the class. Components, again, are just a really, really critical part of design. And I talked earlier about design systems. I'll go on a really, really quick tangent about kind of what they are. A design system is the way that you best understand how to work as a team. So in this particular instance, let's say we're the Figma Decal staff. And I mentioned earlier that we have that slide deck template going on. I'm actually going to just dive into our files and show that to you so you can get a sense of what I'm talking about. So let's say over the summer, we had one of our members, Miles, actually made this slide deck template for all of us so that all of the slides we made would look the same no matter what. and we all use that template of components in order to make sure everything was uniform. So what he did was make the separate file by itself called slide deck template. He made all of the slides that we needed to use. So like a 3-image slide, a 2-image slide, a title slide, all of that good stuff. It's taking a while to load because it's a pretty big file. And then he turned all of them into components. They weren't variants. He had them all as separate components because we literally made this before variants came out, and then we had to change it and add it to the curriculum. So these are all different components. You can see here, we've got all this color and text styles we talked about before. Those are also part of a design system, making sure that everybody is using the same uniform text, the same uniform colors, and the same uniform building blocks and pieces as a part of design systems. So with this, he did this, made all of them components, and what he actually did was he shared it and made it, he didn't share it there. He published the library into our workspace. So when you go to assets and you click on this library book, he's basically able to publish it from here. Later on, if you're working in a team that has a design system, you're going to be going to that panel and clicking on the library icon to access all those libraries that you have. So I can see that I have different libraries possible from Blueprint, from Figma Decal, used in this file, different things I have going on from IDOT. So make sure that you get familiar with that if you're ever working in a team. These libraries are going to really save your life, save your ass when you're doing a lot of work that doesn't need to be redone all the time. Okay, awesome. So we are about like halfway at time. We're going to talk through these other tools and then we'll take a quick break. So these other tools are going to be Smart Selection. We'll talk about grids and guides and constraints. So Smart Selection is honestly one of the most powerful things in Figma. I think it is a super underrated tool. It's a really easy way to rearrange things. So when you're working with Figma, it's guaranteed that your project is going to start having a lot of layers, a lot of elements that you're going to be needing to rearrange all the time. Smart Selection helps you do that rearrangement by letting you select a group of items, tidy them up automatically so they have even spacing, and then adjust the order with just a click and a drag. So when you have a group of objects you want to rearrange, you don't have to drag them each manually. So what you want to do is make sure that they're aligned or that they're tidied up, and then you can select all of them, and these little pink icons are going to show up. These pink circles that are handles and pink lines that are dashes. And from there, you can basically rearrange stuff super quickly. So just to show you what that looks like, I'll actually just do it with the entire slide deck. This is something we have to do at the end of making all of our decks. So I'm going to just go ahead and select everything, Control A, and I'm going to see all these pink handles are coming up. When I have those come up, what I can actually do is just click and drag. I can space them all out differently. I can zoom in and say, oh crap, this slide is in the wrong place. These pink handles show up. So what I'm going to do is click and drag, and it's going to let me move it. It's going to let me move it into whatever place I need while still maintaining all of that really nice spacing that's been done. Yeah, you can also, again, reorder objects like I just did. When you have these two selected, you just grab that pink handle in the very middle and drag them. You can select the objects however you need, and then use that smart handle. One note about these is that if you're zoomed out, it's not always going to appear. That pink circle might not show up. You might, if you ever are doing it and you see the pink outlines appear, but you don't see the pink circle, you just gotta zoom in more. It'll show up once you zoom in just enough. Another interesting use case of this is that you can resize a lot of objects at the same time or select different things to resize. So it's a little hard to see what's going on here with the GIF loop. But all three of these are going to be selected. And you can see that the middle and the bottom ones are going to have the pink filled in circles. That's the person clicking on them. So when those are selected, it's going to be able to resize just those two instead of all three. And then you can basically just resize them however you need. I can't think of a really practical use case for this, but it is helpful sometimes. I'll show you right now how you can do that. I'm going to make just a bunch of rectangles. I'm going to drag this out. I can actually hit Command D. It's going to copy and paste them in the correct spacing. I'll also show you the tidy up function. So these are going to be 4 with even spacing and 1 that's a little bit too far. I'm going to select all of them, and you might have actually seen this show up. When I zoom in, this button's going to appear. This is the tidy up button. So I'm going to click it, put this in line, click it, and now they're spaced evenly and the pink handles are there. So with that, I want to say, oh, I actually want every other one to be, a little bit bigger. So I'm going to hold Shift and click on those two, or sorry, not Shift. Oh man, okay, so all 3 of those are now selected. I want to make them actually taller. So I can just do that, and those 3 are going to be taller, but not the rest of them. Any questions about Smart Select? If you're trying it on your own, you've come up to any things that aren't working for you? Okay, awesome. Grids and guides. So these are going to be a really important thing to use whenever you want to make your designs pixel perfect, which is basically all the time. So what are these grids and guides? So they're basically two tools you can use to help you align objects and keep spacing in mind. The words are pretty self-explanatory. They're ways to make sure everything is exactly where it needs to be. So guides are lines that you can drag out from the rulers. If you ever used Google Slides, you might have seen that there are rulers that you can drag out to have these static lines that stay where you need them to stay. The layout grids, on the other hand, show you these nice big stripes, these big lines to show you how things are kind of, what the visual rhythm of everything is. Yeah, so guides that you see here in this example, you can turn on the rulers with Control or Command R, and then drag out these guides that you have from each of the screens. So in this case, this person has this page going on where they need everything to be aligned on the left side. There's like a hard margin that you want to keep at all times with the menu, the text here, this line. So they're going to go ahead and just drag out that ruler. Same thing goes for the top. They're going to drag it out from the top here. You see that they want to maintain this alignment here at the center. So they want this menu, they want the logo, and they want the search bar to all be aligned in the very center, maybe at a baseline, to make sure that things can interact. So if you've ever seen those measurement guides when you're dragging stuff around, all those red lines pop up. These guides are going to be able to be something that you can snap to. So even if there isn't like already an object there, that line is going to interact as an object. So Figma will naturally like smart snap it onto that line whenever you need it to. So again, just to show you that really quickly, let's go into this slide. I'm going to select it. I'm going to hit, was it Shift R? So Shift R is going to show me those rulers. I can also do it by, I think you can search it here. That, by the way, was Control slash. Control slash is going to show you this search option. I can open the ruler, show it here. So now that I've got the rulers open, I'm going to go ahead and just drag one out and put it there. Drag one out and put it there. So in this case, I want everything to snap on the left to this left line. So if I just put a piece of text here that says, whatever the crap, I can drag it and it's going to automatically snap nicely to the line whenever I need it to. So that is ruler grids or ruler guides. The next part is grids. So layout grids let you create consistency across your designs, which makes it easier to adjust spacing. It reduces your time whenever you're making mock-ups. You're like, oh, I don't know if everything is aligned. Now you do. Now you have no excuse. And it lets you have more flexible layouts than just having all of those ruler lines. So the grid gives you a sense of like natural tempo, natural rhythm when you're looking at something. You can apply it to anything like a frame. So in creating this layout grid, what you want to do is select the frame that you want to apply the grid on. Remember that it must be a frame. It can't just be a rectangle, can't just be a groove. It must be in a frame. Then in the right sidebar, you're going to see an option that says layout grid. You can click the plus sign. It's going to add a layout grid. By default, it's going to make like a nice grid paper look for you. It's just going to be a 10 pixel by 10 pixel grid. And then you can click on that icon there to adjust all the properties that show up. So we'll go ahead and play around with this in a second, but basically it's going to show you the small menu that has the option for grids, columns, rows, and then color. Column and row properties are editable, so you can have different spacing, different numbers of rows and columns going on. You can have the margin, the offset. All of these are most easily understood when you play with them. You can also make a grid fixed by setting it in a certain way. So you see here in this example, these two are the same thing, just one is pulled really wide. But in this one, they wanted the grid to stay and to be 3 narrow lines. In the other example, they've pulled it really far, and you can see that the lines are actually pulled proportionally the same way. So it's going to be a lot of toggling things, finicking around with it to see exactly what you want it to do based on the particular use case. So really quickly, I'll actually show you the layout grids that we have on for everything. Yeah, so this is actually the layout grid we use for all of our slides. There's a lot going on, but it means there's more flexibility when we have things like long pieces of text that we don't necessarily have like a smart or an exact space for. We use this across, again, everything that we do. You can see that here, everything is lined up against this particular part of the grid. In this one, these pieces are lined up against that part of the grid. It's a lot more flexible than just using guides. It's a lot more modular. So it's an easy way to make sure that everything follows, again, the same rhythm as before. Yeah. Any questions about grids or guides? Oh, yeah. So basically what you can do is apply more than one set. So if I go in, actually go ahead and just do that. So here's a frame. So you want them to be different colors. So we'll go ahead and do layout grid plus. I'm going to click on this, and I actually don't want it to be a grid, I want it to be columns. For this one, the columns are going to go ahead and be blue. So now I've got 5 columns that are all blue. I can make it 6 instead. I want 6 columns. They're blue, and let's have it have a 20 pixel margin. So we're going to bring them in, squish them a little bit. Now I'm going to add the rows by clicking the plus sign and adding a second grid on top of it. So when it's going to add that 10 pixel grid by default again. I'll go ahead and make it rows. And now the rows are whatever color I want. So something to keep in mind is that they are going to interact with each other. So it might not look great because it's going to bleed through. It's a little bit muddy right now because it's a little bit gray, a little bit blue. But that's basically how you do it. You want them to be separate, 2 separate grids going on. Yeah, any other questions? Okay, awesome. Last thing before we go into this break is going to be constraints. So I talked about this a little bit in one of the office hours, but what happens to your content if we resize it? You might have seen this with the trading cards. You might have tried to resize it and seen that some of the stuff moved, some of it didn't, some of it just got cropped off. This is because of the way that constraints are set up. So when you resize an object or an element, sometimes you want it to maintain in the same place. For example, say you have a website with a logo, you always want the logo to be in the top left corner. But in this case, when the constraints aren't set the way you want, the website's not going to react the way that you want it to. So think of any time that you had a Word document open and you made the document smaller, Google Docs document. If you make the windows smaller, all of the text still stays in the middle, and all the stuff at the top, you can still see both sides of it because it's been resized to fit your screen. The same kind of goes for Figma. If I were to say, no longer make this full screen, take a look at this Help and Resources button. It's going to still stay. It's going to stay here. So again, like the left and right sidebars are always going to be sticky with me. They're going to resize to be wherever I need them to be, no matter how I change the window shape. So constraints do exactly what they sound like. They constrain or keep elements in certain spots. So they basically keep our elements in the places that we want them to be, allowing for really responsive and easily adjustable designs. You're going to realize that when you're designing something, when you design on an iPhone 11 by default, not everyone that uses it is going to be on an iPhone 11. You need to think about how you constrain stuff. So when you use it on an iPhone 4 or on a Pixel 2, they're all still going to look the way that you want it to look. So there's a couple different options. There's basically the horizontal constraints and the vertical constraints. We'll go ahead and just look at it in the file here. I'm going to go ahead and put this square in the middle of this frame and turn everything off. And I can see the constraints here. So for the horizontal, I have left, and right, center, and scale. And then for the vertical, it's going to have top, and bottom, center, and scale. So there are situations where top and bottom and center, and also left and right and center do mean different things. So sometimes it's going to mean that they resize, and sometimes it's going to not resize. So by default, anything that you add to a particular frame is going to be left and top constrained, which means that if you do the standard way of resizing something, which is from here, it's going to look like things are moving there. So yeah, so what I want them to do sometimes is to actually scale. So if I put this in here, and I change this to be scale, and change this to be scale, you're going to see that it gets bigger it's not really obvious, but you can see that it gets smaller when I go here, and it gets bigger when I go here. Sometimes that's what I want to happen, sometimes it's not. If I want to have, again, like this Help and Resources panel in the bottom, I can go ahead and make a circle, and I can make sure that it stays right and bottom. And that's going to make sure it always stays there, no matter if I make this super big, it's going to always be exactly where I want it to be. So that's basically the gist of constraints. I would recommend that you just play with this to see how they all work, to see whatever you need whenever you do things. The easiest way is just to try to mess it up, try to get it all messed up, try to just make it react in ways that you don't want it to react. And one more thing is that if you are ever resizing something and you don't want the constraints to work the way that they do, like for example, in this case, it's going to do that. If I want to ignore that, just press Control or Command. It's going to lock them into position no matter where they are. And this is essentially how you quote unquote crop a frame the way that you would crop an image. So again, resize while holding Control to ignore all constraints. Yep. All right, any questions before we go into our break? Okay, awesome. We're going to have, I think, a 3-minute break. There is quite a lot to still cover. We're going to come back and talk about composition and spacing, as well as prototyping and wireframing. Let's go ahead and come back. We'll start again at 7:59. Hello, everyone. We're going to go ahead and keep going. There's a lot of content to cover. Teaching way slower this semester than we were last semester because it's not online. So we're going to try to get through all of it. So composition and spacing are, very related to what we just talked about with all of the grids and guides, all of the constraints. So visual hierarchy is a really critical part in making sure that all of your designs are readable, understandable to anybody. So it's important to make sure that the audience knows exactly what the most important part is and what to focus on. So if you see like a newspaper, the first thing you're going to see is probably the headline. You're going to see the subtitle and then any image, and then you're going to see the text. You're not going to look at this and say, let me read this tiny body paragraph first. You're going to be reading that title immediately. That's why that headline has to be so catchy. It's why that headline has to be so bold. It's why they have to say on the moon and not like 2 astronauts finally got to the moon for the first time. It needs to be easy to say, easy to read, easy to remember. So by establishing these natural focal points, we present our designs with the right priority, and we correctly communicate the purpose of each part of your design. So if an article title, like we said there, is not properly emphasized, that information is lost. People are not going to go ahead and buy the newspaper. In addition, creating strong visual hierarchy makes your designs consistent. So making sure that you know every frame of this app has the title at the top, it has the menu at the top. Once that's established, people are going to remember that. It's going to be easier to use your content. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use visual hierarchy, from color to layout to Gestalt Principles. Some of these are going to be in your reading as well. And we're going to kind of talk through a little bit of each of these different things. So size, scale, type, colors, all of these different things that create senses of differences, dissonance, and also harmony are going to be things that you can leverage to make your designs react the way that you want them to. So the Gestalt principles, Gestalt is actually not the name of a person. It means shape in German, which was mind-blowing for me last year, are principles of basically psychology and design linked together. So the Gestalt principles attempt to describe the links between how people perceive elements visually so that we can use those understandings to improve the ways that we design. There are a lot of principles, but we'll talk through really quickly a couple of the core ones. I really recommend that you look into just Google Gestalt principles. You're going to see 2,000 different kinds of explanations of them that are going to explain it visually a lot better than we can really quick. So the first one that we want to think about is proximity. So maybe this is easy to think about, but elements that are closer to each other are perceived to be more similar or somehow related than those placed further. We can use this to create mental groups of related information or to organize content in a way that makes sense. So proximity is how close things are to each other. You also have common region, a similar idea but a little bit different. Elements that are placed within the same region are perceived as groups. So for example, when I'm looking at y'all in the room right now, it looks like there's a group there, a group here, and a group here, because you're sitting next to each other with space in between you. So obviously know that you just kind of sat down, or maybe some of you are friends, but mentally from the outside, it would seem like you are groups. It seems like you're related because you're sitting together. The same applies for any kind of design. You can create separation between content or emphasize one particular element over the other. A couple others, similarity. So elements that share similar characteristics or properties such as color, shape, texture, size are perceived as similar or related. So this aids in organizing or classifying objects. One thing you might be able to think of is when you look at like Candy Crush and your brain wants to organize them and wants to see all of the things that look similar and bring them to be closer together. Closure is when a group of objects are perceived as one object. You might not see this a lot normally, but you will see it a lot in logos. So you can think of like the World Wildlife Fund. It uses that negative space in a really fun way where your brain fills in the gaps. Your brain is saying like, okay, obviously this is not actually a panda, but it looks like a panda when I fill in the blanks that we have going on there. So logos are going to be a fun way to see things like closure. And continuation, this is also maybe not necessarily as common, but when you have objects that are arranged in, say, like a line or a curve, you can perceive them to be more related. So in these examples, even though they're color-coded in one way, my brain wants to read this as a vertical line with a squiggly line going through it. My brain wants to read this as an X instead of having it be like a V and two legs. So even though all of these different things are going on, there's shape that's shared across everything, and there's color that's shared across groups. My brain wants to prioritize the continuation. A part of this is also that your brain is sometimes processing these things as physical and not just on the screen. So if I'm thinking about this as like a physical set of lines, obviously it's not really going to be like, I can make this with my hands, like that. It makes more sense to see it as like this, as this, when you think about them as like physical objects. That's basically all we're going to talk about for Gestalt principles, but keep this in mind. We're going to go through them one more time. Proximity, common region, similarity, closure, continuation. A lot of different things that you can apply to your work and think about. A lot of it is going to be intuitive. You're going to think of things and you're going to realize they work because your brain likes it when you look at them. Okay, a little bit less easy to intuit is spatial and grid systems. So organizing your spacing is a really key way to make your designs really great and add that kind of level of polish that makes things feel really good to look at. So spatial and grid systems provide a framework for you to arrange your elements, which lends the finished work a predictable flow and rhythm and basically keeps everything really focused. So quote unquote, a spatial system is a set of rules for how you measure, size, and space your UI elements. So why exactly are those grids that we talked about so helpful? Why is it something that is so common? It's a built-in feature for Figma. You're going to always be making decisions like, how far away do I put this button? Or where do I put this text box? Or how long does this need to be? When you have a built-in grid system, those questions are always answered for you. It's always going to be a multiple of whatever your grid system is. So in this example, we've got one set of items with no clear vertical rhythm and then another with an 8-point spatial system. So when there's no clear vertical rhythm, everything feels a little bit awkward. It's not lined up exactly how you want it to be. You can think like, oh, this one's a little too close and that one's a little bit too far. And these two are almost the same height, but they're not really the same height, and it feels a little uncomfortable. things look uneven and the grouping is unclear. You know, sometimes there's something in your brain that's like, all of these chairs need to be turned the same way. They all need to be spaced apart because your brain likes it when things look like that. So when I have a spatial system applied, for example, this 8-point spatial system, where there are 8 points of spacing between every element or a multiple of that, the objects look really nice. So we've got 8 pixels between everything, and all of them are also going to be multiples of 8 long. So I see that, like, even though these are different sizes, it feels comfortable because they're multiples and because they have consistent spacing between them. And when these are the same height, it's a lot easier to look at and a lot easier to understand. The design that doesn't have a system can feel inconsistent, it can feel untrustworthy or just off in some way. It feels like that last bit of effort wasn't really put in to make it all look nice. So the layouts, by making them more predictable and trustworthy, can be more pleasing to the eye and to the user. Now with that, I do want to call out, maybe you don't always want that. Maybe you want something to feel uncomfortable. You have this information that the spatial systems are what people are expecting. It's what people think that they want to see. But if you want to make the viewer uncomfortable or you want to call attention to something, maybe you can ignore that. Maybe that rule is something that you want to break. So think about that as I teach you all of these like different rules and different things that are expectations. It's okay to break stuff. It's okay to not do them the way that we want. You know, anytime that your English teacher said that you can use a run-on sentence here, or said that you can use extra ands, or said you can use extra commas, it's because you know a rule and you get to break it. So keep that in mind as we go through the class. Anyway, how to define these better? So to create the spatial system, you want to select that base unit that everything is going to revolve around. So typically, even numbers are going to be easier because you can divide them, and anything from 4 to 10 is pretty helpful. A lot of places are going to use 4-point or 8-point or 6-point. I see a lot of 12-point. It's actually just 6-point. So a lot of the time, things are going to be like 24 pixels or 12 pixels or 16 pixels, or not 18 pixels away from things. Odd numbers aren't always the best, again, because when you have to do a half pixel, things are going to get blurry on your screen. It's not going to look the way you want it to, so even numbers are preferred. And to choose an increment, think about how the user wants to see things. You know, do you want it to be really tight, or do you want it to feel really spacious? You can think of an example as the Gmail inboxes, where there is a normal and a compact and a cozy. So all of those different things are going to have different amounts of spacing to communicate different amounts of information and to feel a certain way. So there's, again, a couple different types of grids that we talked about. So sometimes you're going to want those columns or you're going to want those rows. With columns specifically, it lets you organize content into a way really easily. Here in this example, we have like 6, 4, 3, 2. It's really comfortable. 12 is a great number because it's divisible by like freaking everything. So you can have it span a certain number of columns and feel really nice in that way. So an example of this would be like some of our slides. Let's see if I can find some. We have a lot of 3-column spaces here where we want them to all have a certain kind of rhythm. It's split really nicely. We have a lot of 4 columns as well. We just passed one, I think. Nope, I lied, I can't find it, but we definitely used them before. But again, that kind of vertical spacing can be really helpful for things that are a little bit more strict. For example, when you're on a phone screen and you know it's always going to be roughly the same width, having that vertical spacing is going to be super helpful. You can also use a modular grid. So this uses rows and columns both to define a matrix that has both axes. These can be a little bit more rigid and strict in their spacing, so they might not allow for too much because you're using this grid that already exists, but sometimes it can be helpful. There's always a place for different things. So there's a lot of other grid systems. You can definitely get into it. You can get really into the research for how to use grid systems, the research for how your eye is trained to look at certain things, but they're all built on the same basis of rows, columns, grids to have padding and spacing. Yeah. Any questions about those spacing or composition principles? Awesome. A quick note on those as well. This is going to be where having all of those alignment tools is going to be super helpful, and also just using Alt. That Alt shortcut to see how far apart things are. It's going to come in handy all the time. So I'm constantly checking like this needs to be 24 pixels away or it needs to be 12 pixels away. It's going to be really helpful for that. But yeah, the last topic for today is ideation and wireframing. So this is about brainstorming and iterating on your ideas and making sure that your designs don't always have to look really good. So what is wireframing? I've said this a few times now, and why is it important? So when you try to create designs, you often have a lot of ideas that you want to try out. Different layouts, different fonts, different compositions, different flows. Wireframing is a really good way to work through your different ideas without having to spend 2 hours on each of them, and then also use those practices to prompt new ideas. Something to note is that this is sometimes called prototyping. If you ever take an engineering class, that first step where you make it out of like plywood or you make it out of muslin is called prototyping. That said, we also refer to a different skill as prototyping, specifically that piece where you use interaction. So for the sake of this class, we're going to refer to this beginning ideation as wireframing instead of prototyping. So just something to keep in mind. So you want to experiment with different ideas when you're given a problem space. So let's say that your project is to make a cover for this book. You've read the book, you kind of know what's going on. Actually, I guess it's not really, I guess this is for a book app and not an actual book. But we can still go with a book idea. It's a little bit more tangible. So let's say that you read a book, you know what it's about. It has a main character, it has a main problem, main antagonist. You have all these ideas in your head. You don't want to go ahead and make every single book cover the way that you're imagining it. You want to get those ideas out on paper as quickly as possible. You want to sketch them, brain dump them, whatever it is, to make sure that you have all those ideas out of your brain. Those are kind of considered wireframes. Those are considered low fidelity. So wireframes are basically your design at different stages of the process. So this can mean it can be that beginning process. It can be once you've refined it a little bit more. It could be the very end of it. But wireframing is that process of kind of iterating on what you have going on. Using different fidelities or stages of wireframes with your designs allows you to be more flexible and rearranging details. And it makes you that you're not married to those small details until you've decided on the big ones first. So I said fidelity just now. What is fidelity? You can think of fidelity as the quote-unquote level of completeness of a design. So low fidelity means that you've started from the beginning. You've got basic designs, you've got basic shapes, basic objects, focusing on positioning, focusing on generally this is where this is going to go. Generally, this is what this is going to look like, but you're not going to worry about the color. You're not going to be worried about the fonts. Mid-fidelity means that you've worked on a little bit more. Maybe you've implemented components. Maybe you've added some of the text. Maybe you've applied the branding that already exists. And high fidelity means that you're basically close to the final. So everything is polished. You've got everything except that last layer of shine on it. Everything's there but the drop shadows. So an example here of this website, just cropped a little bit so you can see the basic idea. This is a low or mid-fidelity wireframe of the website's homepage. So you can see that there is the main headline here. It's filler text right now. Instead of the image, you just have a gray square that says productphoto.jpg. It's a placeholder for now. And on this section, you have the layout. You have the general idea of like information, line, subtitle, information, line, subtitle, information, line, subtitle, and then all of these cents just as name. So you can have the idea of like, I'm going to put them all here, but I don't really care what they look like right now. I just want to get this idea out of my brain immediately. So in this version, it's a high fidelity, maybe close to the final or actually the website itself. So you can see that the images are there, the text is there, all of the names of the different scents are there as well. Now, this is another example just of one particular frame that might be the low, mid, and hi-fi. You can see that the mid-fi here and the mid-fi here aren't like necessarily exactly the same. Low, mid, and hi-fi are something for you to personally decide. So for one person, their mid-fidelity, what they consider halfway through the project, could look like what my high-fidelity looks like, and that's okay. For another person, their low fidelity might be like already mock-ups, but for me, my low fidelity is like pencil on paper. That's what I like to do. So don't feel like you have to make everything look this way. Just think of these as 3 stages that you can move through the process of. Think about maybe you want to have 15 ideas in low fidelity. You want to have 15 different sketches. You want to just sit there until you've thought of 15 ideas. And then you want to bring maybe like a couple of them to mid-fi. You don't necessarily want to make all of them. You don't want to have to put in the time to make 15 fully fleshed out websites. But mid-fidelity is pulled back enough that you feel comfortable doing like, hey, I can do 3 of them. I can make 3 of these screens in Figma. And then at high fidelity, you basically want 1. At that point, you want to have narrowed it down and thought about like, hey, this is definitely the idea I want to go with. I'm going to go ahead and add the color, add the polish, add the text, all the way that I want it to be. So like I just talked about, low and mid and hi-fi are a little bit flexible, especially mid and hi-fi. That line can be really blurry. And in this particular case, this person's low fidelity is what I would consider my mid fidelity. Again, I'm saying a lot of words right now. Basically, the process looks different for everyone. You don't have to be married to these terms. It's just something that's helpful for you to talk about, hey, I'm in this stage of my personal design process. So basically just keep in mind that hi-fi, close to the final, you've got 1 idea. Lo-fi, you've got lots of ideas. Anything in the middle, it's anyone's game. It's mid-fi. Yeah, any questions about any of that? Any kinds of concerns about what low, mid, and hi-fi mean? Awesome. And I'll just add this, since I feel like I was wondering about this. Lo-fi music is the same idea. It's low fidelity music. It's lower quality music. That's like where the original term comes from. So you can think of that. Maybe you listen to lo-fi with your lo-fi designs. But actually, that's it for today. We're going to actually go ahead and wrap up, talk about our homework and our lab for the week, and then I'll be here to answer any questions for the remaining time. So this week's homework and lab I'm super excited about. I think they're really, really fun. Homework 3 is going to be making Spotify. So we're going to take the desktop app for Spotify, and you're going to actually show us what a low, mid, and hi-fi would look like for you. So we've got some examples of it there for you as well. Spotify is always an interesting one to do practice on because they change it all the goddamn time. Like Spotify keeps updating their UI for some reason, and maybe with this you can start to see like what those small differences are, what those subtleties are. We actually did not, I think, update the screenshot from last semester, so it's actually going to be maybe an older version than you have right now, but maybe play around with that and see how it feels to have things look just a little bit different. So this one is honestly a really fun project. It's a little bit bigger in scope than the last two. It is just going to be one screen, and you're going to get to implement components for different things like the playlists, for different things like the friend activity, things that you're going to realize like, oh, this is a repeated component. This is a repeated thing that you see in actual apps. And the lab this week, again, we know that components have been a little confusing, so we're going to have you do Figma's variance playground. Figma has already made a really awesome file that teaches you how to use variance, because when it came out, everyone was like, what the shit is this? I don't know how to use it. So they made a really great file to just play around with it. So no need to reinvent the wheel. You're going to play through that and then do a really cool pattern grid activity that Elizabeth made. So yeah, and the secret word for today is going to be Gestalt. That's Gestalt, Gestalt. I hope I spelled that right. Gestalt. Yep. Oh, it was yellkey.com/full, Full. Yellkey.com/full. Yep. And the announcements for this week, again, the homework and the readings and lab are going to be up. By the end of the class, we're going to go ahead and publish them on B-Courses. A quick note is that people realize that the B-Courses issue is having brackets in the name. This is the last time I'll mention it. Don't put brackets in the name, and you should be all okay to go. Sorry, question? Do you have a question? Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, and the last thing is that we're going to try to set up a YouTube, because posting to Google Drive is crazy. All of the lectures are 2 gigabytes. So we're going to try to just have everything go to YouTube so you can reference it more easily in the future. Yeah, that's all for today. For those of you on stream, thank you so much for joining. I'll leave it up in case there's any more questions before we wrap. But thank you so much for coming, and we'll see you next Tuesday for the pen tool. Next week is the pen tool. I'm very excited. Anyone who's into illustration, this one's for you. All right, thank you, everyone. Are we good in the stream? Okay, bye-bye.